The history of Native American peoples is complex and often painful. The Apache, known for their fierce resistance, occupy a significant place in this story. Their struggle for survival has seen them protagonists of epic clashes. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you like these videos and leave a like. Now let's start. What does it mean to live in constant fear of attack, knowing that your home, your family, and even your very life could be destroyed in an instant? This was the daily reality for many settlers and tribes during the turbulent era of the Wild West, a time marked by uncertainty where survival depended on constant vigilance and resilience. Among the many conflicts that shook the frontier, the Apache raids stood out for their harshness. Women in particular paid a very high price. Understanding this period also means engaging with historical evidence describing their treatment during raids, captivity, and the mechanisms of social and cultural control employed. The Apache, known for their warrior skills and adaptability to the harsh environment of the Southwest, often resorted to strategic raids to obtain resources and assert their dominance. These attacks were not random incidents, but responses to environmental conditions, tribal rivalries, and external pressures. Women were among the most vulnerable. During raids, they were often captured and forced to travel long distances, tied up, exhausted, and traumatized. Historical sources, such as the writings of the Spanish friar Alonso de Benavides in the 17th century, speak of unspeakable suffering inflicted on prisoners. Once captured, women became tools of survival, used and traded as war goods. One of the most painful consequences of captivity was forced marriage. In many native cultures, including the Apache, marriage was a way to strengthen social bonds and ensure cohesion. However, in the case of captured women, these unions were rarely consensual. Often forced, they were intended to erase previous identities and integrate women into Apache society under conditions of subordination. These women, torn from their communities and cultures, found themselves living in imposed roles, with little control over their lives. Marriage thus became an instrument of political and social control, a form of forced assimilation. The emotional and psychological burden was devastating. The loss of freedom translated into a complete erasure of one's identity. Among the most bloody practices that emerged during conflicts, scalping, the removal of the scalp from the enemy's head, had a powerful symbolic meaning. Among the Apache, the scalp represented a trophy, a visible demonstration of victory and a means of instilling terror. Often displayed as a warning, these scalps conveyed an unmistakable message. To oppose the Apache was to face a brutal fate. While this practice was also adopted by other groups, including settlers and bounty hunters, the fact that it sometimes targeted women, who were seen as emblems of vulnerability, added an additional level of cruelty. In addition to imprisonment and forced assimilation, many women suffered physical punishments, such as whippings and beatings. These violent acts were not only intended to punish, but to break the will of the prisoners, silence them, and ensure their submission. The testimony of Olive Oatman, a young woman captured in 1851, highlights the suffering inflicted to induce obedience. Although parts of her account have been disputed, they reflect a larger reality of violence and the annihilation of individual will. Among the most dramatic practices documented were torture by fire and mutilation. Female prisoners could be subjected to exposure to flames or irreversible injuries, such as amputation of fingers or disfiguration of the face. Such acts served not only as punishment, but also as symbolic messages and deterrents to enemies. The scars, both physical and psychological, left an indelible mark, transforming the bodies of the victims into instruments of terror propaganda. Apache women also suffered similar treatments from settlers or rival tribes, demonstrating how the spiral of violence spared no one. The atrocities committed during this period, from brutal raids to forced marriages, from mutilations to psychological abuse, represent a dark but essential chapter in the history of the frontier. Reflecting on these events means addressing the complex dynamics of power, identity, survival, and revenge that characterized the westward expansion. These stories, however difficult to hear, invite us to question the meaning of resilience, the impact of structured violence, and the need to acknowledge even the most painful sides of our past. The experiences of women during the conflicts in the Wild West, particularly in the context of the Apache raids, give us a raw but necessary image of frontier history. Behind every piece of data, every testimony, every scar, lies the voice of someone who has lived a reality marked by violence, loss, and survival. Studying these experiences does not mean condemning a culture as a whole, nor justifying the horrors committed by one side or the other, but recognizing the complexity of an era in which the line between victims and executioners was often thin, and the struggle for survival dictated dramatic choices. Today, remembering these stories serves not only to honor the memory of those who suffered, but also to question the power, identity, and legacy of violence in human conflicts. Only by courageously facing even the darkest chapters of the past can we aspire to build a more complete, aware, and just memory. That's all for today. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. See you next time. Bye.